Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the City of West Hollywood WeHo Arts Talk, Rock and Roll Billboards of the Sunset Strip with Robert Landau. First things first, please make sure your phones are silenced or off during the talk. And we're so pleased that Robert Landau has agreed to do this talk, and also he's lent us 10 of his photographs, which are blown up almost billboard size. You can see them right now in the old Overflow Tower Records parking lot at 8775 Sunset Boulevard. Thank you. Yeah, so you can see them at the 8775 Sunset Boulevard, the old Overflow parking lot for Tower Records. They'll be on view until the end of the year. And there's a lot of great information there as well that Robert's prepared. This is also part of a larger City of West Hollywood celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Sunset Strip's counterculture era. So we've got an event, we've got an exhibit upstairs in the library, Henry Diltz's photographs, that'll be on view until the beginning of June. So if you haven't seen that yet, pop on up and see. He took a lot of photographs of all the Laurel Canyon musicians, and I think you'll really enjoy that as well. A little bit about Robert. He grew up on the Strip, right above the Strip near Tower Records. And as a teenager, he would walk down and see all the great billboards and notice how quickly they would turn over. And so he started taking photos of them so he could share them with his friends. And we're so glad he did, because he's got the largest collection of these photographs now. And he's going to share a few of those with us. So without further ado, let's welcome Robert Landau.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming down. And I also need to thank the City of West Hollywood and the City Council for inviting me to speak here tonight. And furthermore, I really want to thank Michael Che and Laura Grover for organizing this event and the great job they did promoting it. I'm mic'd. Thank you. Relax. Thank you very much. As a kid growing up here in Los Angeles, my parents had an art gallery on La Cienega Boulevard, so I was most fortunate to grow up around some really great art. But at that age, it didn't speak to me the way some of the billboards I'm about to show you did. Billboards can be viewed as time capsules. I was recently driving around on Melrose Avenue in my old neighborhood when I spotted this vacant lot where a building had just been demolished and something caught my eye. When I got out and took a closer look, I realized that there were some billboards from a much earlier time that had been preserved between the buildings. I felt like an archaeologist who had just uncovered some rare fossils. It looked like they were from the 1920s, which by LA standards is ancient history. They seem to capture the look and feel of a whole bygone era. And well, that's what I'm going to try and do tonight with some of the first photographs I ever took, only I won't be going back quite so far. But first, let's take a quick look at today's billboards. They are all either digital images printed out onto large screens or big multimedia screens with the images transmitted up to them. Effective advertising, no doubt. I was initially drawn to billboards because at that time, the best ones were all hand-painted. When I was still in school, I learned where they were being painted, and I talked my way into the studio. There were two big billboard companies in LA back then, Pacific Outdoor and Foster and Kleiser. Foster and Kleiser had an airplane hangar-sized building on Washington near Vermont, and I called up one day and told them I was working on a school project and asked if I could come over and take some pictures. For me, wandering around in the billboard studio was a total trip through the looking glass. I was strolling through canyons of giant tropical fish and monolithic platters of bacon and eggs. Assigned to each mega canvas was a modern-day Michelangelo perched on a mechanical scaffolding, riding up and down with his paintbrushes and palette of colors, bringing these surreal king-size commercial visions to life. There was a hierarchy among the painters at the studio. The new, less experienced guys would paint the cigarette packs and blurry backgrounds, while the seasoned pros were entrusted with the more difficult large faces. Here, the company's top painter, Mario Rueda, is working on a billboard for a bank with the slogan, "The Fine Art of Banking," in which they recreated great masterpieces, in this case, a Van Dyck portrait. Now, there's Mario posing in front of the finished work, and he's holding up a small printed copy of the artwork that they use for reference. You also get a truer sense of the scale. And then here it is installed on Santa Monica Boulevard. Doesn't seem quite so big anymore, does it? When well conceived and executed, these hand-painted billboards had their own unique look. In fact, no two were exactly alike. And that quality was a key factor in the success of the Sunset Strip billboards. Nevertheless, when their posting time was up, they found themselves back at the Foster and Kleiser plant, where they were dismantled, whitewashed, and made ready for a new incarnation. Bye-bye. On to Hollywood. By the mid-1960s, there really was a gap between the generations, and the big-time celebrities that I'd see on TV were just not relevant to me. I mean, did anyone back then really think Chow or Jim Nabors were cool? Sammy Davis Jr. might be belting his lungs out at Tahoe, and Frank Sinatra might be making yet another comeback, but I wasn't buying it. The glitzy and slickly packaged showbiz performer, no matter how sexed up, was just not cutting it anymore. Then, in 1969, Woodstock happened and everything changed. Now suddenly, the performers whose music I was buying were up there on the Strip. And it wasn't just the performers who were changing. The artwork and the message was totally different. FM radio was the direct channel to this new music, and no cool pad was very cool without an old orange crate type box full of all the latest record albums and some kind of hi-fi stereo gear setup with a tuner and a turntable, and maybe even some big Mickey Mouse sized earphones for late night listening. The music acts were getting known through radio airplay or by going out on long concert tours or by word of mouth. But the key marketing tool for creating an identity and selling the record albums was the record album cover. This was particularly relevant for all the new British bands on the scene who were introducing themselves to the American market for the first time. Album cover design was targeted to a specific audience and didn't have to make sense to anyone else. I doubt that anyone over the age of 30 at that time had any idea what this billboard was about. As this new generation continued to pour its expendable cash into record album collections, the record companies suddenly had money coming out of their ears and were hiring the top art directors, graphic designers, photographers, and even sometimes big-name fine artists, like in this case, Andy Warhol, to create album covers. The record companies could have spent their money on TV ads, but this generation would have considered that way too establishment or selling out. The groups like the Byrds who were playing in the clubs on the Strip would never consider running a television commercial. But the billboards, which looked a lot like the posters we were already tacking up on our walls, were a cool way to let everyone know that a new record had been released. For the record companies, it was a match made in heaven. Never mind that it didn't make a lot of sense financially, that a great deal of money was being spent on signs that would be up for a few weeks and then disappear. They might only be reaching a small segment of the market, but it felt like the right segment. Young people going to nightclubs, cruising the Strip, and buying records. And maybe, even more importantly, since so many of the elite and influential people in the entertainment business had offices and homes on or near the Strip, they were talking and bragging to themselves and to their competitors. In those days, most of the bands coming through LA on long tours from other cities were staying at hotels on the Strip, like the Continental Hyatt House, Chateau Marmont, and the Sunset Marquis. And often, the first thing they wanted to do on their way in from the airport before going to the hotel was to drive by and see their billboard. In the stages of canonization that rock acts went through from unknown artist to major rock and roll stars, it now ranked right up there with seeing your face on the cover of Rolling Stone. The Sunset Strip billboard had achieved its own cachet. Tower Records, located amidst all the billboards at the heart of the Strip, was more than just a record store. It was a destination drawing music lovers from all over the city. Now, by this time, I was living on Shoreham Drive, just above the Strip, and when I left home and drove down Horn Avenue every day, this was my view. As all of these elements were coming together, a case can be made that a mini golden age of Sunset Strip billboards had begun. There was a perfect storm of timing and circumstance. Los Angeles was sitting high atop a multi-billion-dollar global entertainment industry of which the music business was now a big-time player. And the Strip was ground zero of that industry. And also, there was a large youthful population that had money and was only too eager to embrace new artists. The bands themselves, from the Beatles on down, were breaking musical boundaries and redefining the entire culture, and many had become so universally well-known that they could appear on billboards without any advertising copy whatsoever. The record companies already had in their possession outstanding artwork that had been designed and commissioned for the album covers. The final piece of the puzzle was translating the format and design of the square record album package to mesh with the elongated 14 by 48 foot horizontal frame of the outdoor billboard. No problem, because by this time, many album covers had become fold-out or gatefold designs. And as the importance of these gatefold album covers grew, designers learned to create long horizontal imagery with the key elements falling on the right-hand side or front cover when folded over and displayed in record stores. Nevertheless, this full gatefold design, along with an overall design approach that stressed provocative visual elements and for the most part avoided extraneous text and slogans, suited the billboard medium to a T. Now, in situations where the album cover design did not lend itself easily to the billboard format, like this collage of freak show performers on the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street album cover, a few key elements could be cleverly drawn out to create a traffic-stopping display. Billboards, by way of the rock and rollers, could now deliver an exciting new raw energy, along with more gritty and decidedly unslick imagery than had been seen before in outdoor advertising on the Strip or anywhere else for that matter. With the explosion of pop art onto the scene in the mid-60s, this was also a volatile period in the world of the visual arts. Commercial and fine art never seemed closer. Pop artists had mined imagery from the commercial realm and given it a new spin, and in a very short time, the commercial artists reclaimed it. This type of exchange between the fine arts and the commercial arts has always taken place. And all the trends in various art movements, from minimalism to photorealism to op art, all eventually filtered through billboard designs. Another option that was available to advertisers with deep pockets, like the record companies, was the sequential campaign, in which an original billboard could appear for a period of time and then be altered or replaced to reveal a sustained, ongoing message. This also assumed that the same viewer would pass in front of the billboard multiple times during its posting in order to get the full message, and it created a kind of time-lapse dialogue between the board and the viewer. This Christo-inspired wrapped-up billboard remained like this on the Strip for several weeks and created quite a buzz. Then, when the cover was finally removed, and it revealed progressive rocker and Yes frontman Rick Wakeman in some kind of a bat cave or bloody fortress of solitude, it was, quite frankly, a bit of a letdown. For his record titled Foreigner, Cat Stevens presented this serene view of paradise with a small cutout figure resembling himself in the corner, slowly painting out his album cover until it was completely gone. Very zen. I think most people would have done it the opposite way. After the Beatles broke up at the end of the 60s, John Lennon was living in LA for a while and wanted to remind people that he was still around. This was one of the first billboards to use cutout portions or real negative space to draw attention to an otherwise highly minimalist design. Oh yeah. Later on, an unidentified graffiti artist added this message in bold red paint, creating his or her own sequential campaign commentary. I think Ringo was missing the limelight too. This is for one of his early post-Beatles solo projects. Ringo had several billboards on the Strip in this period, including this one that simply spelled out his name in big letters. That is, until the letter I revolved around, revealing Ringo. Wow, moving parts. Oops. There we go. There's the effect. All right. Eric Clapton's billboard for a record titled Backlist featured a three-dimensional lampshade, but looked a little frumpy in the daytime. But at night, it created a nice mood. It's as if he's sitting alone in his hotel room above the Sunset Strip practicing a few licks. Marvin Gaye's billboard lit up the night for a while at a key location above the Old World restaurant, just across the street from Tower Records. Certain billboard locations have longer approaches and are focal points of the traffic as it snakes around Sunset Boulevard, and this is one of the best and most expensive ones. By the mid-1970s, California had become the center of the rock and roll recording universe, and the California sound was getting global attention with hit-making groups like the Eagles. Talented local designers and photographers produced billboards that perfectly captured the look and feel of this locale for them, and other artists like Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, and Neil Young, who were all living in nearby canyons and beach towns. Bob Dylan didn't have too many billboards on the Strip, and when he did, they were not particularly memorable other than to document a particular phase he was going through. Now, classic Sunset Strip billboards were not often defaced just for the hell of it with random graffiti, but they often did evoke strong reactions that people felt compelled to respond to. The Rolling Stones had always cultivated an edgy image and often pushed the boundaries of what was socially acceptable. And this 1976 billboard for their record Black and Blue drew immediate protest from a women's group. It was graffitied and then quickly taken down just a few days after it first went up. Back in those days, not only did you need film to take a picture, you had to choose between black and white or color film. And when I passed this board for the first time, I had a roll of black and white film in my camera, so I grabbed a few shots with the idea that I'd come back later with some color film, and by the time I got back, it was gone. The story that went around on this one was that Springsteen, while on tour in LA, had seen his board and was not particularly pleased with it, and that he, along with some of his band members, got up on the roof of the building it was on and added this graffiti message: "Prove it all night." Well, this had been rumored for a long time, but I'd say about a year ago, Springsteen gave an interview to Rolling Stone, and he actually copped to the deed. He admitted that he was responsible for it, and that one drunken night after playing either at the Roxy or somewhere in LA, they decided to get up on that billboard. And you can see if you get up on the roof there, there's a little ladder, so it really wasn't that hard to get from there up to the ledge in front of the billboard. And he described how he got onto Clarence Clemens' shoulder with the intent of he was going to spray paint a mustache on himself. But he said he couldn't quite reach that high, so he settled for "Prove it all night." I mean, who else would write that? And over time, while I was out shooting these pictures, I started becoming more aware of the billboard's interaction with their surroundings. For instance, when I shot this board up close and from a low angle, I noticed, and I don't think you can read it here, but there was a sign on the building for an office that reads "The Fund for Animals," and this was a billboard for the Pink Floyd record Animals. A lot of the billboards then had no text or copy, so if you didn't know what they were selling, they didn't care. It was just, it was about putting the artwork out there for their fans. So that was a Pink Floyd billboard for Animals. They were also known for combining amazing visual effects with their music in concert and always produced great graphics with their records. This billboard appeared on the strip before the record was released and before anyone knew what was up. Then, slowly, over a period of a few weeks, the bricks were removed one by one to reveal the beginning of a design underneath, but still no text or title. I'm pretty sure that this was the last version because they did finally add some copy with the project title. Now, there's no getting away from the fact that certain drugs of a mind-bending variety were now becoming part of the whole scene. A billboard for the electric group Rhinoceros acknowledged this cultural development with a multicolored psychedelic rhino. Billboard designs began to reflect this introspective, drug-influenced shift with fantastic and surreal landscapes. Or were they mindscapes? Is anyone having any flashbacks? Many record albums were now becoming complex conceptual works, and the staging at concerts was becoming much more elaborate in order to illustrate the complex themes of the records. The concert-going audience had also become more sophisticated and had come to expect a visual experience more engaging than just strobe lights and smoke. The band ELO created this plexiglass UFO with flashing lights that hovered over the strip for a while and was later seen as a prop in their live shows. A lot of imagery from this period has a sci-fi aura about it, and the theme of space-aged alienation resonated with a spaced-out audience looking for escapist fare. As this movement played itself out, the trends were leading the music scene back to a more theatrical and entertainment-based formula that could be more readily counted on to fill large sports arenas and appeal to ever broader segments of the population. Showmanship was now required, even for recording artists like Steve Miller here, who were not necessarily natural showmen. Alice Cooper, on the other hand, was a natural showman, and his concerts are remembered much more for the visual stunts than the music. The eyes on his billboard intermittently glowed at night to help convey the sinister image he was cultivating. One of the great iconoclasts of rock and roll who never really fit comfortably into any specific category was Frank Zappa. He didn't sell truckloads of records, but he occupies his own unique niche at the far end of the rock and roll spectrum. Here he was promoting his movie 200 Motels, and who else but Zappa could have Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler manacled together in chains on a billboard on the Sunset Strip and still hardly be noticed? Nobody graffitied this one. Not that there's any space to put any graffiti. And oh yes, there's one more very important aspect of this whole period. You had to have a big head of hair. And the billboards captured that look. You may not remember all the bands, but they range from the known to the lesser known to the completely unknown to the who the hell were those guys? Well, we might not know who they are, you may, but we may not know who they are, but they know that they'll always have had that special moment when they appeared on a billboard above the Sunset Strip. Now, by the end of the 1970s, the music scene was in a state of total flux. Along with all the different permutations of pop and rock music, disco had established itself with the slickly produced dance beats for the urban club scene crowd, and at the same time, a fledgling punk movement was just beginning to bubble up through the cracks. This lack of a unified direction in the music business allowed for all kinds of commercial projects to take center stage for brief periods of time. Cher, who has been reinventing herself throughout a long and successful career, used the opportunity to present herself with some kind of a bat-winged headgear for a record called Take Me Home. Or maybe that's a butterfly, I'm not sure. Hollywood has always had a handle on catering to the preteen crowd, and every generation produces a few heartthrobs for the young kids to swoon over and spend their parents' hard-earned cash on. Back in the day, we called it bubblegum music for teeny boppers, and both Sean and his brother David Cassidy took turns cashing in. I do have to say, though, that this board for a record titled Under Wraps, dreamed up by Sean himself at age 18, was an extremely well-conceived and executed use of the medium. Then, here you have, at the height of pretentiousness, Kiss in their cartoonish costume persona. Fortunately, there were people like Randy Newman around to poke fun and remind us all just exactly what the true motivation behind all this nonsense really was. Oh yes, and speaking of fun, top comedians sold a lot of records too, and Steve Martin was right there on the strip pointing out that comedy is indeed not pretty. This was also a fruitful period for charismatic and multi-talented performers like Bette Midler, Diana Ross, and Elton John to score big with records and concerts and to leave their mark on the strip. But with the success of the smash hit soundtrack for the movie Saturday Night Fever, the Bee Gees found themselves at the top of the heap. And as the 70s came to a close, disco ruled the day. The Village People, with their billboard, announced that they were definitely ready for the 80s. And along with recording artists like Donna Summer, they kept everyone dancing their heads off. Here now, by way of contrast, is one from that period that shows you what a poorly designed and badly executed billboard could look like. And I'm also guessing that if you were in your late teens then, this is what a lot of adults might have looked like to you. And like the youth of a previous generation, maybe 10 years back, you might have been looking for something with a little more substance to relate to. Then, as seems to happen in periods of creative stagnation, some imagination gets to work, and artists like Elvis Costello emerge, taking the music in a fresh new direction. Once again, briefly, Billboard artwork began to reflect the development of new acts with new sounds and new looks, like the Eurythmics. And the Motels, who were an early new wave band from LA, came up with this edgy artwork painted on the side of the Whiskey A Go-Go. Many exciting new groups arrived in the early 80s and were pushing their way up the ladder. Only now, along with the Billboards, there was an alternative new medium, one that was speaking more directly to the audience they were all trying to reach, and that medium was spelled MTV. It first launched in 1981, and music videos quickly established themselves as the must-have promotional tool for emerging music groups. The money, along with all the creative juices that once flowed freely into flashy billboards, evaporated overnight, and from this point on, Sunset Strip billboards would never again regain the same relevancy in the world of music entertainment. Back in the heyday, around 1977, there was a short period of time where this enormous billboard stood empty on the strip for more than a few days. Some wise guy or wise person with a can of spray paint took the opportunity to pose this intriguing question. Could this be art? And my answer is, of course, why not? Anything can be art if an artist does it. Billboards are a medium and can be used many ways. There have been programs all around the country featuring artist work on billboards, and there was one here back in the 70s in which several artists, including Ed Ruscha, participated. This work of Ed's, titled Back of Hollywood, was painted onto stitched canvas and stretched over an existing billboard frame. Another legendary figure, Rick Griffin, also participated in that project, and he created this billboard titled Imperial Message. Rick was one of the pioneers in 1960s psychedelic poster, comic, and album cover design. Now here's a more recent one for LACMA from a Salvador Dali exhibit featuring a reproduction of a backdrop the surrealist painter made for a scene in a classic Hitchcock film. Commercial intent is not necessarily the litmus test for artistic billboards. This board for Blue Note Records is a smash hit with or without the message. As is this stunning piece of artwork for the Who's rock opera Tommy, which glared down from the Sunset Strip for a short period of time and then vanished just like all the others. In closing, I'd just like to say that the artistry of the rock and roll billboards captured the spirit of an entire generation, but was witnessed by only a relatively small number of people. I was most fortunate to be there at the right place and the right time, to have a camera and an appreciation for both the music and the artwork that represented it so well. I'm thrilled to now be able to share it with all of you in my book, Rock and Roll Billboards of the Sunset Strip. Thank you. Now, I'd like to take a few questions in a moment, but before I do that, I want to share with you something that happened after the book came out. My book came out a few years back, but well, what happened was we put this picture of the Beatles on the cover, Abbey Road, and that billboard went up in 1969. And those of you who are my age will remember at the time that there were all kinds of crazy rumors flying around that Paul McCartney was dead. And people were, well, first of all, they interpreted this billboard as a funeral march. They were saying, well, Paul's barefoot, so they're marching him off to the cemetery. And there was a car parked on the street, 28F. People were playing the records backwards, looking for clues. All this sort of crazy stuff was going on. And quite frankly, the record companies, both Apple in England and Capitol Records here in Hollywood, did nothing to dispel the rumors because they were driving sales. People were talking about it all the time, so they were happy to be getting all that extra attention for the album. So nobody, nobody really, Paul I think was in England at the time, so they didn't make him available for the interviews. So anyway, these interviews are flying around, and at the height of that, in December of 1969, somebody from Foster and Kleiser is driving on the street, and they come across the billboard, and suddenly Paul's missing his head. His head has gone missing. So they ring up Capitol Records. This image was designed in England by a man named Kosh, who designed the album cover, this classic album cover. But the billboard was designed in Hollywood at Capitol Records by, I forget the fellow's name now. Anyway, he designed this billboard, very clever guy. He decided not to add any copy, like the album cover, there was no copy. But furthermore, he decided that the Beatles' head should extend off above the top of the frame so that you'd see these well-known profiles highlighted against the blue California sky. And it was a very effective billboard. It got a lot of attention. But nevertheless, somebody from Foster and Kleiser notices it. They give a call to Capitol Records. They get the art director on the line. They say, someone took Paul's head. What should we do? Should we replace it? And he said, well, no, don't do anything just yet. Let me come out and take a look. So he drives out and he looks at it and he goes, you know what? This will get a lot more attention like this. So just leave it alone. So, it was left alone for the rest of its run. It got a lot of attention. I think Time magazine wrote about it. And nobody was too excited about finding Paul's head. So, after a while, the whole furor died down. Now cut to like some 40 years later, my book's about to come out, and I figure, I'll post something on Facebook to start some conversation going. And I posted the thing saying, if anyone can tell me what happened to Paul's head, I'll give him a free copy of the book. Not thinking that anybody would come forward, but that it would start some conversation going, maybe drive a few sales. Anyway, the very next day, I get an email from someone, and that someone is this gentleman. He says, I've got Paul's head. Here he is. He's here tonight. Robert Quinn invited me out to his house, and sure enough, he claimed a copy of the book, and he's had it all these years, and it hangs in his living room. And thanks to Robert, a little piece of the history got saved because nothing else from that period remains except the photographs I shot. So thank you. Thank you, Robert. Thanks for being here. At one point, I actually got Robert together with the man who painted that, who's since passed away, one of the top Billboard painters. You saw him painting that Van Dyke picture, and he signed the back. So my next goal is to get you together with Paul and have Paul sign. We still don't know if he knows the story because, you know, there was not that much press in those days. Nothing went viral, you know. It got on the AP wire, and so maybe somebody picked it up. Anyway, let me take a few questions. Hope we have a couple right here. Do you want to have people come up here?
Please go to the mic.
Yeah. Why don't you come up to the mic here?
Everyone can just line up here, and then we'll get it all on.
Do you mind coming around? Come on. We'll get your question in.
Disco and punk coming in at the same time. And we saw some disco billboards. Was there anything in punk, and if so, what might that have been?
You know, in the late 70s and the early 80s, punk was beginning to happen there. I remember seeing bands like Devo playing downtown, and there was a scene, but they weren't selling enough records at that point to really generate this kind of mainstream studio support, which it took to get a billboard. Now, the first billboard, I didn't show that, but the very first rock and roll billboard is considered to be the Doors' 1967 for their debut album, and a man named Jack Holtzman was responsible for that. And he said at that time it was about $1,500 for a billboard for a month, and I think now it's anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 a month for a billboard in a key location on the Strip. So even then, that was a sizable investment. So I think that's why you didn't see that. And if you notice, there was only one for a jazz record, that great Blue Dot billboard. And even then, they had bunched together about 8 artists because, again, they just didn't sell as many records as the rock and rollers were in that period. Okay?
At the time, were you attending concerts, and what was your musical taste when you were taking these photographs?
Well, let's see. I was, the first one I took when I was 16, and yeah, I was definitely into the Beatles. That was probably the first thing. But my taste ran to like a lot of the 70s California people like Joni Mitchell, Jackson Browne, Neil Young. I wasn't a huge Eagles fan, but I saw them play. Of course, I like the classic rockers, the Rolling Stones, The Who, the Beatles, and got to see a lot of them play. You know, I was pretty much into like sort of mainstream hardcore classic rock and roll. And by the time I got around to disco, you know, I was sort of losing interest a little bit.
Yeah, it happened to a lot of us.
Thanks.
Do you know whether these were unveiled with any kind of a party, or were they done in the middle of the night? Or
No, that's a good question. No, actually, the only one that was unveiled was that crazy Rick Wakeman one, and that got tremendous press. They covered this thing and they left it alone, and I mean, people were clamoring to know what was underneath, and it really was a letdown when they unveiled it. But it got a lot of attention for Rick Wakeman. So that's the only one that was unveiled. Actually, what they did was these crews would come out early in the morning before anybody was up, really. I was going to school, so I'd see them, and I actually got friendly with some of the painters. That's how I sort of hung out with these guys. But they would do it, you know, like 6 a.m. in the morning. So you'd be driving, and all of a sudden it was as if a new billboard had just appeared. You know, you didn't really get to see that transition where they were taking them down and putting them up. And what they did was they were painted on a series of like six pieces of wood, and they'd boom them up and down one by one.
Since you have the person here who took the Paul head down, I wondered if you could give us any stories about how that was done, or the impetus about it, or and is there a has anybody ever wanted to take it back, it being kind of a theft or whatever? Because I think that I should have it, frankly.
Did you keep your ticket? There'll be a lot of.
Also, that was the place to be, and we lived up in the hills, and we'd see the Birds or the Buffalo Springfield and go to the original Hamburger Hamlet, and you know, it was just the place to be.
Whose idea was it to cut Paul's head off?
That was my idea.
Good
And
idea.
it was December 22nd, which was my birthday, and I thought, this will be fun, let's go do this on my birthday. And I got two of my best buddies to help, and one was skilled in using a skill saw, and the cleaners, dry cleaners behind it, there was a light bulb, bare bulb, so we were able to screw in a fixture and throw before the battery operated skill saws, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. I think everybody thanks you for doing that, because it's
Thank
a great relic. It really is.
Anyway,
Very few people at that time, very few people thought or believed they were hand painted. And when you look at it closely, now you can see the brush strokes. But they were so well done that from a distance, people just assumed they were large photographs. So I think that really not only captures that period of rock and roll, but the artistry of these painters. Yeah.
the billboard was fairly easy to walk or climb up behind it, so no one was actually watching us cut off from the front. But it was after 2 o'clock in the morning. The sheriffs had actually come up to me earlier in the evening and asked what we were all doing, kind of milling around and giving tips with our hats and all this stuff for signals. And so there was 5 of us at that point, but then my 2 bravest friends came back with me.
Thank you,
Did it.
Robert. Thanks. Any more questions? And I would like to let y'all know that after the talk, I'll be signing copies of the book in the lobby. So anyone would like to have a signed copy, I'll be right out there. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? That's it? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you.